Richard Hale was a man who seemingly had it all, a sprawling empire of luxury hotels that stretched across continents, cars that gleamed in the sun like jewels, and a mansion perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the sea. But behind the glimmer of success, his life was shadowed by heartbreak, for his only daughter, Emily, a delicate girl with eyes that shimmered like melted gold, had never walked a day in her life, and though countless doctors, specialists, and miracle healers had been summoned, they all left with the same verdict: her legs were too weak, her nerves too damaged, and she would live her life confined to a wheelchair. Richard had spared no expense, not because of pride, but because he couldn't bear to see the sorrow on Emily's face every time she gazed longingly at children her age running freely in the gardens of the estate, their laughter echoing like music she could never join, and the guilt consumed him daily because Emily's condition had been the result of complications at birth when his late wife's health had deteriorated during delivery, leaving Emily alive but with permanent disability, and his wife gone forever. So Richard buried himself in work, building empires, signing deals, attending galas, but in the quiet of the night he would sit by Emily's bedside, holding her hand as she asked, "Daddy, will I ever run?" A question that pierced him like a blade, one he couldn't answer with honesty because hope had long been taken from him. It was in one of these sleepless seasons that he realized Emily needed more than just medical care. She needed someone who could bring her joy, patience, and perhaps a miracle, and so he began searching for a nanny who could not only look after her but truly understand her heart. Yet after dozens of interviews filled with polished resumes and rehearsed smiles, none seemed right, until one rainy morning when a young woman named Clara walked into his office, her clothes simple, her voice steady, and her presence carrying a warmth that immediately made Emily smile, something Richard hadn't seen in months. And though Clara had no prestigious medical training, she carried with her a quiet conviction that she could help Emily, not necessarily to walk, she admitted, but to live fully despite her limitations. Still, there was something in her tone that made Richard pause, a subtle confidence like she knew something others didn't, and so he hired her, not realizing that decision would unravel everything he thought he knew about miracles, destiny, and the power of unseen hands. From the very first day, Clara treated Emily not as fragile porcelain to be pitted, but as a girl bursting with potential. She spoke to her about the world, encouraged her to paint, taught her music, and even brought her into the kitchen to bake cookies, gently lifting her from her chair to the counter so she could stir batter with her small arms, giggling with flour on her cheeks, and for the first time in years, the mansion echoed with real laughter. Richard watched with fascination, but also confusion, because every so often he would glimpse Clara doing something unusual, placing her hands softly on Emily's legs when she thought no one was looking, closing her eyes as if in silent prayer, humming melodies that didn't belong to any song he recognized, and while he dismissed it at first as harmless kindness, something stirred uneasily in him because Emily would always claim afterward that her legs tingled, that she could feel warmth traveling down to her toes, sensations doctors had long insisted were impossible. One night, unable to contain his curiosity, Richard lingered by the doorframe as Clara knelt beside Emily, whispering words in a language he didn't understand, her palms glowing faintly in the candlelight, and though Richard told himself it was just shadows and imagination, the undeniable truth struck him when Emily's laughter rang out, "Daddy, my feet feel alive." Words that made his The days that followed became a whirlwind of wonder and doubt for Richard, for though his mind was trained to trust contracts and numbers, his heart could not ignore the changes blossoming in Emily's life, and each morning she awoke with more strength than before, able to wiggle her toes, then move her ankles, then shift her legs with trembling determination, while Clara stood beside her with unwavering patience, her hands guiding, her voice soothing, her belief in Emily radiating like a fire that refused to be extinguished. And Richard, though terrified to admit it, began to believe too. Still, he wrestled with suspicion, wondering who Clara really was, what gave her such unearthly ability, and one evening, when the moonlight bathed the garden in silver, he confronted her, his tone sharp but laced with desperation. "Tell me the truth, Clara, what are you doing to my daughter? Is this some trick? Some game with her heart?" And Clara, instead of defending herself, simply smiled with tears brimming in her eyes and said softly, "I do not heal her, Mr. Hale. She heals herself. I only help her see what no doctor ever could, that within her is a strength waiting to be unlocked, and love is the key." And though her words sounded like riddles, something about them rang with sincerity, shaking Richard to his core. In the days that followed, Clara intensified her secret exercises with Emily, mixing stretches with songs, movements with prayers, and though Richard pretended to be busy with his empire, he found himself often hiding behind doors or peeking from balconies, unable to tear his eyes away from the sight of his daughter smiling through effort, sweat on her brow, determination in her small frame. And one fateful afternoon, when rain hammered against the mansion windows and thunder roared in the Distance, Richard heard Clara's urgent call from the playroom, his heart leaping as he rushed in only to see Emily gripping Clara's hands, trembling on her feet for the very first time, her legs quivering like newborn fawns, her eyes wide with both terror and joy as she whispered, "Daddy, look, I'm standing," and in that instant, Richard dropped to his knees, tears pouring freely down his face as he reached out to steady her, his strong hand supporting her tiny body while Clara guided her steps. One shaky movement after another, until Emily took not one but 3 miraculous steps into his arms, collapsing against his chest as laughter and sobs mingled in the air like the breaking of dawn after the longest night. The news spread quickly among the household staff, who wept with joy, and Richard, a man who had once believed money could solve everything, realized that no fortune in the world could compare to the priceless gift unfolding before him, his daughter walking. Yet the true test came weeks later, when doctors returned to evaluate Emily, their skeptical eyes and clinical detachment soon replaced by disbelief as they watched her walk slowly across the room unaided, her voice steady with triumph, and though they mumbled about unexplained nerve activity and rare recoveries, none could deny what they saw, while Richard knew deep down it was not science alone but something far greater, faith, love, and Clara's unbelievable devotion, that had made the impossible possible. In gratitude, he offered Clara riches, a home, even a lifelong position in his household, but she declined gently, saying her mission was not to stay but to move where she was needed, to help other children who had forgotten their strength, though she promised to always remain in Emily's life as a friend. And so, on a golden morning when the sea glittered with light, Richard stood with Emily at the gates as Clara departed, his daughter no longer bound to her wheelchair but walking beside him hand in hand. And as they watched Clara disappear down the road, Richard whispered to Emily, "You see, my love, miracles do exist. We just have to believe." And Emily, her eyes shining with gratitude, nodded and said, "She gave me my legs, but you, Daddy, you gave me the courage to use them." And in that sacred exchange, Richard felt his heart heal from years of guilt and sorrow, replaced by a renewed purpose, to cherish every moment with his daughter, to raise her not with the weight of his empire, but with the freedom of unconditional love. And as their story spread across the world, of a millionaire's daughter who walked because of a nanny's unbelievable devotion, millions were touched, inspired to believe in hope, and Richard himself, now often addressing charities and foundations, would end every speech with the same heartfelt plea: if this story touched you, if you believe in miracles and the power of love, share it with others and never stop believing. And don't forget to join us on this journey, because together we can keep spreading hope. And with that, Emily, walking proudly beside him, would smile toward the camera, a living testament that miracles are real and waiting to be discovered.